Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I would like to call this meeting of the Transportation Committee to order. And as a reminder, this meeting is being shared virtually through Zoom for those who couldn't join us today in person today, and it is being recorded. Committee members, please remember to turn your mic on before speaking so that those online and in the room can hear you. Please remember to state your name before speaking, and it's helpful for people joining virtually. I would also like to go around the room at this point and have everyone introduce themselves. I will start. My name is Tara Orban. I'm representing Cook County.
Doug Ferguson, CMAP.
Pam Jones, Center for Neighborhood Technology.
Megan Swanson, IDOT.
Chuck Abraham, IDOT YPI.
John Paul Liebla, FHWA.
Steve Schulke, IDOT District 1.
Karen Robles, Illinois Tollway.
Jack Cruikshank, Illinois EPA.
Kyle Whitehead, RTA.
Good morning, Vig Krishnamurthy here for CDOT.
Lynette Civarella, Metra.
Eric Llewellyn Pace.
Tom Vanderwood with the Northwest Indiana Regional Planning Commission.
John Loper with DuPage County DOT.
Christina Kapkowski, Will County DOT.
Audrey Wenning, Metropolitan Planning Council.
Scott Hennings, McHenry County.
Morning, Jackie Forbes, Kane County.
Heidi Lichtenberger, Kendall County.
Mike Clemens, Lake County.
Jennifer Henry, CTA.
Amy Lee, CMAP.
Okay, can we go to this side of the room, please?
Keisha Jefferson, CMAP.
Martin Menninger, CMAP.
John Carpenter, CMAP.
Russell Petroviak, CMAP.
Vicky Barrett, CMAP.
Cam Adab, CMAP.
Ryan Tomto, CMAP.
Elizabeth Ginsburg, CMAP.
Yojo CMAP.
Kasha Hart, CMAP.
Sarah Stolpe, CMAP.
Brett Brown, CMAP.
Richard Norwood, CMAP.
Blanca Bella Schneider, CMAP.
Okay, Terry, can we use your help for members of the audience, please?
I was like, maybe we'll get out of it this time. Terry Dixon, CMAP. Nora Beck, CMAP.
Luca Batish, MCDOT.
Brian Larson, North Shore Council of Mayors.
Jane Grover, CMAP.
Eric Trinoto, Northwest Municipal Conference.
Gretchen Clark, Kane Kendall Council of Mayors.
Greg Swanson.
Lily Swanson.
David Wells, CMAP.
Josh Bluestein, CMAP.
Ashley Cruz, CMAP. Lacey Wright, CMAP. Katie Gienap, CMAP.
All right, thank you. It's good to put a name to all these faces that we're seeing.
Heidi. She just walked in the room.
So before we begin, I do have a procedural matter to address. Voting members qualified to participate remotely include Ryan Hull from Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission. He has requested to participate remotely, and this would be in compliance with the requirements of the Illinois Open Meetings Act. So a vote of those present is required to allow this participation. So do I have a motion to allow Ryan Hull's participation, please?
So move, Amy, CMAP.
Okay, second from Jack. Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Welcome, Ryan.
Yes, thank you. Sorry I couldn't be there in person today.
Well, thank you for your participation. And just for those that are curious, I was as well. Those that are, it is in compliance with the Open Meetings Act, and members that are participating remotely can vote and participate as committee members.
Thank you.
So moving on to agenda item number 2. There are no agenda changes. Do we have any announcements from committee members? Okay, thank you. Moving on to approval of minutes. So we have before us, it was included in your packet, the draft minutes from our May 31st meeting. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes as presented?
So moved. John Loper, DuPage.
Thank you, John. Do I have a second?
Second, Amy, CMAP.
Thank you, Amy. Motion is seconded. Is there any discussion on the minutes as presented? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Agenda item number 4. Amy Lee from CMAP will be providing us an update on agency and board activities.
Hi, good morning, everyone. This is not Lollapalooza. It's just one notch down on the fun meter. So welcome. It's been a bit since we last met, so we do have quite a few updates. I think we're gonna have those listed up here just so that I can stay brief. If you have questions for me afterwards, feel free to reach out. First is July was Disability Pride Month. It marks the anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. We celebrate and support continued awareness around the everyday challenges that are still faced by people with disabilities. As you all know, one of ON2 2050's goals is to create a system that works better for everyone. And so that affirms a lot of the initiatives that we are all committed to doing, some of which will be highlighted in some of our other updates today. Next, we want to congratulate Lake County DOT and Round Lake on their recent $18.8 million raised grant award for the Cedar Lake Road alignment. This project includes new intersections, ADA compliant sidewalks, and pedestrian crossings, as well as improvements to the Round Lake Metro Station. It will create a safer and more walkable downtown and increase access to affordable transit options. We CMAP are proud to have supported this project. It is, of course, in alignment with our 2050 goals, and it was included in our 2024 list of regional priority projects for IIJA funding. The project had also received support from the Lake County Council of Mayors with $7.5 million in STP local funds for construction. Next, CMAP is excited to announce that we have a new website. For those of you who've been through a website redo, you know how monumental this is. The main driver in the redesign process for us was to make the website more accessible. It complies with web content accessibility guidelines for people with disabilities and prioritizes plain language and accessible structure and design so that users can better understand our work and access information more easily. If your agencies are thinking about these sorts of things for yourself, please feel free to reach out to us. I'm sure our comms staff would be happy to share some of our lessons learned. We've gotten some really good feedback so far, but we will have a survey link included in next week's transportation newsletter. If you want to offer us some additional feedback, we're glad to take them to further improve the site. Then if you take a look at our website, you will also know that we just updated our community data snapshots. They are exactly what that is, a data snapshot of each of the 284 communities in our region, as well as 77 Chicago community areas. This year's update features new data related to people with disabilities, updated water source demand and price data, and updated land use and employment characteristics data. We hope that you find this information helpful. Then, August 8th, IDOT and CDOT will host a public open house to share and discuss plans for the future North DeSapo Lakeshore Drive and related lakefront improvements. The open house will include 5 finalist multimodal roadway alternatives, along with their evaluation results and the recommended preferred alternative. At the meeting, project team members will be available to discuss and answer any questions. The next up is CMAP's Household Travel Survey, also known as My Daily Travel. I've provided updates on this before. Here, I'm just letting you know we have completed the pilot. We do plan on doing a full launch, having learned some of the fixes that need to be done. A full launch of the first phase is going to go out after Labor Day. Much like the census, here again, it's not easy to conduct this survey, but as you can imagine, if we do this well, it will provide valuable insight to our collective understanding about how people are traveling through the region. So in advance of that launch, I just want to say thank you to all of the partners around the table, to help us get the word out on that survey and to help us get a representative sample of the region. Next slide. Sorry, I think there's going to be, yeah, here we go. CMAP, we just completed our 16th annual Future Leaders in Planning Summer Program, FLIP, for high school students. We're going to show you some, I guess, some photos here of how things went this week. This leadership development program helps high school students explore the field of urban planning and learn about the issues that shape our region and communities. I know for myself, I didn't know that urban planning was a thing until I was almost done with college. And I have to say, I've met a number of college students as well as some of our summer interns who actually learned about urban planning through the FLIP program. So this is a great way to sort of build that pipeline of talent. I know all of us are looking for help in our planning departments. So hopefully this will continue to bring that talent to our region. Next slide. Last but certainly not least, CMAP announced 30 projects that were awarded for technical assistance. The project types and municipalities are shown here on the screen. CMAP's technical assistance program aligns with On to 2050, of course, but this year's projects here feature opportunities to improve traffic safety, make travel more accessible, increase transportation choices, and help communities and thus the region prosper in years ahead. So that concludes my update from the CMAP team. I'm happy to answer any questions now, or you can grab me after the meeting. Okay, I'll turn things back over to the chair.
Thank you, Amy. At this point, we're going to ask Russell to come on up to the podium and talk about the Transportation Improvement Program amendments. Russ?
It doesn't matter. All right. Included in your packet today is a memo detailing the 62 tip changes. It doesn't. Thank you. Included in your packet today is a memo detailing the 62 tip changes contained in formal tip amendment 24-10 and the 225 tip changes contained in administrative amendments 24-10.1 and 24-10.2. We do have some, as the years progress, we have some new members to the committee. So just as a little refresher, the tip amendments 24-10, that just means 2024, that's 24, and 10 means it's the 10th amendment. Anything that's a formal amendment is just the whole number 10. The point 1 is our administrative amendments for road projects. The point 2 is our administrative amendments for transit projects. So if you weren't aware of that, now you've been made aware. Here are a few highlights that are on the memo. As seen in the memo, formal amendments resulted in an increase of just over $890 million in total project costs for all prior, future, and current years. One of the more notable changes is to the I-80 project, which is, if you've been out there, you know that project is well underway. IDOT added just over $200 million to that project, most of which is for phases that will be on the upcoming lettings. IDOT also added $63 million to Illinois 53, mainly to do bridge work. They're doing about 10 bridges in that corridor. And the most significant change came from CTA, which added over $500 million to the red line extension. Administrative amendments added $42 million to the tip in all prior, current, and future years. The net change for total costs in the tip from all amendments resulted in $932 million being added to the tip in prior, current, and future years. As shown in the memo, cost changes comprise most of the formal changes, while administrative amendments were primarily AC and ACC changes, cost changes below the formal thresholds, and schedule, meaning letting day changes. CMAP staff is responsible for making sure that the tip is physically constrained. Maintaining physical constraint can be a challenge at times. In this amendment cycle, some bridge projects in particular had to change their program year in order to maintain physical constraint. With the amendments presented to you today, the tip is physically constrained. The amendments, along with the memo, were posted on July 26th for committee and public review. Approval of formal tip amendment 24-10 is requested at this time, and I can answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Russell. Also, thanks for the update on the naming convention. I think we all get a little rusty only looking at these a few times a year. I'd also like to acknowledge Dr. Suraj. Thank you for joining us on the committee today. And I'd like to entertain a motion to approve TIP Amendment 24-10.
Second.
Thank you, Jackie. Are there any questions for Russell? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Russell. Next up, we have Ryan Tomto with a brief update on the status of the Regional Transportation Plan from CMAP's Regional Policy and Implementation Division. Good morning, Ryan.
Good morning. Hi, good morning. My name is Ryan Tomto. I'm a principal policy analyst here at CMAP. I use he, him pronouns.
Ryan, before you get rolling, it's a little hard for me to hear you.
Got it. Let me get closer here.
Closer, please. Thank you.
Yep. So here at CMAP, I oversee the Transportation Investment Strategy Program of Work, which includes the development of the Regional Transportation Plan. And I just wanted to share a brief update of where we're at with that work right now. As you might recall, at the last meeting, Julie Rushke from CMAP presented on the plan review that the team conducted that went and looked at all the various federal, state, county, municipal, and other regional plans within the region to have an understanding of what the goals, objectives, and strategies that are included within those so that we could have an understanding of the landscape of the region and look to see how we could combine those together to make sure we're headed in the right direction with the regional transportation plan. So with that, we have, since Julie has been on a bit of a roadshow with that presentation that she gave here, she's been at other CMAP committees, she's been at the board, MPO policy committee, as well as with meetings with external partners. And through that work, really what we're trying to do is get an idea of the direction we see things headed in to make sure that we're collecting the right data and research through the existing conditions and future needs element of this work so that we can bring the right data and the right research and analysis to stakeholders as we get into the strategy conversation later next year. Also wanted to mention, as Amy pointed out, we did have the future leaders in planning. The team did present to that group and workshopped with them on the future they'd like to see for transportation in the region. And we also met with the Community Alliance for Regional Equity, which, as you'll remember, is a CMAP initiative to form and foster deeper partnerships with community-based organizations to leverage their expertise in the planning process. So in addition to that, want to point out that Martin will be presenting here next on the system performance report. At the last meeting, questions were raised about what we're seeing in terms of data on performance within the region, which there's still a lot of work ahead of us in terms of that data collection and analysis, but Martin will be diving in deeper to that here in a moment to share where we're at right now and what the plans for that work include. Additionally, want to point out that work is underway to develop the financial plan portion of the regional transportation plan. To date, the team has mostly been focused on identifying the inputs needed to the financial model, both in terms of the data for revenues, as well as the various assumptions that need to be made through that process. My colleague, Elizabeth Ginsburg, who's the project manager of that work, will be presenting at an upcoming Transportation Committee meeting to dive in deeper into what that work will entail. And that'll include the discussion of the formation of a resource group that we'll be looking to help us navigate the revenue assumptions being made, as well as any kind of policy considerations that are baked into those assumptions as well, such as things like, when do we think a ruck is going to be a thing? Or how are we going to forecast tolls, things like that. Additionally, want to mention that we have had work underway for updating policies and procedures related to regionally significant projects. Many of you have been participating on that resource group. We've had a bit of a hiatus as we've transitioned from project manager to a new project manager. Leo Torres, who had previously been leading that, took an opportunity in California. So we've transitioned that work over to Jen Miller, who I'm really excited to introduce everyone to when that point comes. But that work is still moving along, and we are working right now to finalize a draft memo to share with the resource group that puts forward some proposals of possible changes that could be made to those policies and procedures, particularly in terms of the definition and thresholds. So for members of that resource group, there should be a calendar invite coming out soon within the next couple of weeks that will include that draft memo, and we'll have that resource group meeting. But of course, we will, after we go through that process, be bringing all of that here to the Transportation Committee to walk through it with you all as well. Let's see here. Also, just wanted to provide an update on the congestion management process. This is a little bit tangential to the regional transportation plan, but it does feed directly into it. So wanted to make sure I provide some updates there. Just as a reminder, the congestion management process, or CMP, is a systemic and regionally accepted approach to managing congestion that provides accurate, up-to-date information on transportation system performance and assesses alternative strategies for congestion management that meet state, regional, and local needs. As a metropolitan planning agency or organization, or MPO, for Northeastern Illinois, CMAP is responsible for maintaining the CMP as part of the metropolitan transportation planning process. Again, a resource group has been formed to help advise on this process to update the CMP, which this work includes identifying objectives and performance measures, developing the process for analyzing congestion, and identifying strategies and recommendations for implementation. The deliverables for this work will include a guidebook and corridor study template, which will be focused on implementation, prioritizing strategies to address congestion that align with and support other regional policy goals. And again, as I mentioned, this work will feed directly into future discussions on the RTP strategies, and specifically on how we as a region will balance what can sometimes be conflicting priorities when we're thinking about things like congestion, goods movement, mode shift, other things like that. And so again, Nora Harris, he is the project manager on that work, and he's working with a consultant team. We have ICF on board helping us with that, and he will be here to this group for a series of upcoming meetings or a series of upcoming agenda items to walk through the work that's happening there at various stages throughout that work. But it will be, the goal is for that work to wrap up by summer of next year. So exciting stuff happening in that space. But otherwise, that's my update, but I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has them.
Any questions for Ryan? None.
Nope, sorry.
Hey, Jennifer.
I'm in your peripheral
Yes.
vision. So I think just trying to get a handle on the different planning processes that are overway and how they interact and feed each other, right? So the CMP is feeding into the regional transportation plan. The climate plans, how does that interact with the RTP? Like, which is coming first and how will they?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is part of how I think one of the ways we see the regional transportation plan. A major component of it is a capital investment plan, right? Well, how are we prioritizing funding for the region? And it almost serves as a bit of a funnel for all the different lines of work that are happening out there. So we do have the congestion management process. That is one piece that feeds into it. The CAP, or the climate action plan, that absolutely feeds into it as well. But we also have work on resiliency with TRIP that'll be feeding into it. We have our safety work underway that also feeds into it. And so again, when you're thinking about those goals, don't have the slide here with me, but I've shown this slide numerous times of kind of the pathway for developing the RTP. And, the first part of it is identifying what is that system we want. And it's the goals, the objectives, and then the performance measures and targets that we attach to it. And those goals, we have things like mobility, congestion. That part of it is really where we're seeing the congestion management process stuff feed in. And that's helping us to understand what are the goals and objectives, what are the performance measures, what is the data, existing conditions, and what are the strategies that we want to use in that space. But we're also feeding in things like the climate action plan for our climate goals, TRIP, Transportation Resiliency Improvement Plan, for our resiliency piece of this. And we're making sure that they feed in and they're communicating to each other in a way that we can have conversations about how do these help, where are there synergies in this, and where are there trade-offs that we need to have a conversation of how we balance that. I think the congestion management strategy is one of those places where we're going to see a significant amount of conversation around how do we balance those different elements. But it's also an ongoing process because there's only so much that we have at this moment in time. And that's why we update this plan every 4 years, is so that we can continually incorporate new things as they come along. But it is worth noting, congestion management strategy, the climate action plan, our resiliency work, our safety work are all on a timeline that can all feed into this process in time for the 2026 deadline that we have in October for the RTP.
Amy?
I don't want to steal Nora's thunder, but you'll see on the agenda, she will be presenting on the climate action plan. And something that's important to bear in mind is the study or the catchment area of the climate action plan isn't 1-for-1 with the regional transportation plan. So there is some need of sort of continued coordination, I would say, between those two. And then that is kind of the purpose of Nora coming here today, to sort of speak to how that larger plan is being developed and then how that will dial into the work that we need to do here.
I'm wondering, is there a place in the development of the regional transportation plan to have some discussion of the travel demand model and how it works particularly for transit? There's been a lot of discussions on various projects about whether it works well to sort of support the case for transit projects. And I'm not sure sort of like if the regional transportation plan seems like a good venue for some discussion of that and some policy making on it. Is that potentially part of the scope?
Yeah, absolutely. We have at the last meeting, we had the conversation on the socioeconomic forecast work, and that helps feed into the travel demand model. So the work has been underway to calibrate that and now to incorporate in the information. But it is planned to at upcoming meetings to have conversations around what we're seeing in terms of the outputs from the travel demand model. And that is a key component of the conversation around strategies and how do we balance different pathways forward.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for update. You mentioned the development of like capital investment framework as one of the outcomes for the regional transportation plan. And I'm wondering if you could just give us some insight into where you're kind of thinking about like what are the principles emerging in the planning process that define regional. And what I mean by that is all the members of the NPO and the implementing agencies certainly have their own like backlog of capital projects, many of them state of good repair based, many of them opportunity based, developed through various frameworks like, City of Chicago has a trails vision, right? It's a generational trails vision, but there's certainly a lot of work that's gone in over the decades to identify, like, for example, opportunity corridors, projection of, future trail opportunities that may, be very far from realization in terms of it's still active rail line, but we have our eyesight on it. And so I know in some capital planning frameworks, you're looking at like the demand for projects, or I should say, actually outstrips capacity in terms of like the marks we get from SDP or something to really implement other capacity constraints in terms of implementation. And it really is like a 10, 15, 25-year capital outlook. So as you develop, like I think all the, not to speak for my colleagues, but I think generally there's huge consensus in values at the moment, right, around climate, sustainability, equity, smart investment, efficient growth. And so where does the regional plan capital framework kind of add that regionalism above and beyond sort of what the MPO members and implementing agencies are sort of like bringing that spirit to our own work so that we can start to think about like these regional principles as well in our own capital development and our own planning?
Yeah, let me see if I understand the question correctly. But I do think that this RTP will be building off the principles of Onto 2050. We do have, as we kind of work to transition into a new model for regional planning, where we're working to have a more focused conversation around vision and having an overarching kind of vision plan that then helps inform all these other more like action focused plans where we can have more focused conversations around specific topic areas. Those are certainly conversations that are being had in that space. I do think for the RTP, we have been thinking mainly about it being an extension of Onto 2050, since the deadline to approve it is in October 2026, and the vision work will go on beyond that for about a year. So that is one of the challenges throughout all of this, is how do we make sure we still have this meaningful conversation and we can pull in that conversation as much as possible into the RTP in that space. But it's going to be a challenge. And I think we're still trying to figure out what it looks like to navigate that over the coming years. But I do think that the regional transportation plan at its core is the space for us to have a space to talk about the priorities of the region. And thinking about it, it is where, how do we talk about how we want to prioritize funding for climate, for equity, for, you know, all those different pieces and goals, and how do we balance the trade-offs there? So this is kind of that piece of it. I don't know. Yeah, beyond that, I'm not sure. I guess I'm not sure if I'm answering your question or not here, but.
No, that's helpful. And it is, somewhat of just like a thought-provoking question. What's on my mind is, there could be a project like that connects Chicago to Evanston. It could be a very good project that in a colloquial sense is regional. There could also be like a very good project in Evanston and a very good project in Chicago that meet all those values and goals as well. And sort of trying to think through, where does that aspect of like explicit regionalism fit in, or like where your thought process is going versus, because the region is so big, there's a lot of work to happen within all the jurisdictions that make up the region as well.
Dr. Suraj.
I think I understand the question, and if I may jump in, this might be a pathway, just putting it out there, see if it resonates. The regional plan that is being developed by CMAP, if it's a top-down process, let's say it's a top-down process, all the individual constituencies that form the region, whatever plans that they're making, they should strive to align their plans in some way, at least in a very cursory manner, identify with one or two of the goals of the regional plan. If they do that, then the corridor specific projects that you're talking about, where they are very, very micro level details, right? I mean, but it becomes the burden of the owner of the entity to elevate its seat at that level, right? So if we do that, if we encourage it, I know it's difficult, but if we do that, then we may find that alignment at some point in time. Just a thought.
That's a good point, Dr. Suraj. I think also the work that CMAP is doing, like you mentioned, Ryan, a lot of these items that we're looking at, there's a tension between them. And I think how CMAP analyzes and, the outcomes of this regional transportation plan will be a model on how we can look at our own programs. And to your point, Vig, what is the nexus between what's considered a local improvement that has regional impact? I think that's something as asset owners that we all struggle with, is, demonstrating the magnitude of the impact and the alignment with the RTP. It's a challenge for all of us. Anyone else, Ryan?
Yeah, I was just going to add too, I having a better idea of the question now too. I think one thing I do want to point to is the congestion management process work as well. I've talked about it as kind of feeding into the RTP, but it does have key elements of it as well that help with that idea of how do we create a structure to help incorporate this into a more context-specific, localized kind of project. And so, as I had mentioned earlier, some of the key deliverables for that include a guidebook and a quarter study template. And a key reason why we wanted to make this a part of that project is because we know through this, even though it's called the congestion management process and it's strategy, but really we know that we can't just think about congestion in isolation. We have to think about it in the context of other things. Really, the opposite of congestion is mobility. So we're trying to think about it in terms of mobility. Also, we know when we're talking about corridor studies and how we address congestion, things like safety, resilience, climate change, all those sorts of things matter in that context. And you have to think about them when you're also thinking about congestion. And so what we're hoping to have come out of that process is a guidebook that helps provide that guidance on how we can work together as a region on these key corridors to make sure we're balancing our various priorities in a way that are going to achieve the outcomes we're hoping for. And part of that template process or guidebook and template will be how do we try to use our collective tools in a way to do that. So, yeah.
Thank you, Ryan. And I think you can tell by the level of interest by this committee, we look forward to more updates in the future, specifically on the different facets of the plan. So thank you. Moving on to the next agenda item, we have Martin Menninger from CMAP's Regional Policy and Implementation Division. He is here to give us an overview on the federal transportation measures. Good morning, Martin.
Good morning. I have good news. I'm going to talk about the nexus between plans. Transportation performance measures, last time you were here, you told us you were interested in learning more about this. Today, I'm going to talk about the many different activities that fit into performance measures and transportation performance management, and talk about a tool that we're building that's hopefully going to bring some of these activities together and give us a baseline to think about them. So this is the Transportation Performance Management Framework developed by FHWA. Transportation performance management is a strategic data-driven approach that uses system information to make investment and policy decisions to achieve performance goals. So that's a lot. This in many ways brings together many different plans to help make sure we're working towards our goals. This is a very busy diagram. The outside of it really talks about culture and data management and things like that. Today, I'm going to focus on the 6 boxes in the core and use those as sort of a framework to think about all the different work that's going on that you're going to be seeing over the next few months to the next year as we update our long-range plan and all of these other plans that Ryan just mentioned. We're going to start at the top with strategic direction. So there are sort of 2 boxes of performance measures. It's okay if you don't keep them separate in your head. I do keep them separate, but there's overlap. These are really just 2 examples. Every plan has goals and measures that you're working towards, but we got federal measures as part of the FAST Act. In my mind, the big parts here are safety, asset condition, and congestion. There's a few other pieces to that. And then the other sort of side of this at CMAP is our plan indicators, and those reflect our plan goals. So Julie presented to you last time we were together about our draft of plan goals. And as those become more established, as we adopt those, there'll be new work streams coming out of those. So a lot of what I talk about is going to be the federal measures, which we've had for a few years now. And have a lot of federally required activities, but similar activities happen on the other side with the indicators. So at the highest level, you develop strategy and performance measures. The next step is to develop targets. We do a lot of this. Every year, you update new roadway safety targets. Some more recent activities, we were planning to bring to you a greenhouse gas measure. IDOT adopted a greenhouse gas target. That rule was put on hold, and so we are going to align that work with our climate action work to make sure that our transportation sector target aligns with the targets in our other sectors. And we're going to be updating all of our targets as part of the RTP update that Ryan was just talking about. So a lot of target setting happening. These targets inform, and if you look on this slide, there's arrows that kind of go in every direction, which I think is cheating a little bit, but maybe also accurate. So those targets feed into performance-based planning. These plans are done all over the place. There are federally required ones that the transit agencies and IDOT are well aware of that look at things like safety and asset condition. But in many ways, all of the planning we do can be thought of as performance-based planning if we are working towards goals using data. The climate action plan, the congestion management strategy, the county safety plans, these are all going to come with data and targets and goals that feed into other processes. And so the plans you developed, we did a large review of county plans. We're taking that into our process as part of our performance planning framework. These really think about how do we achieve the goals. So the transit asset management plans go into a lot of detail on all of their different assets and think about what investments are needed, what condition is it in now. They gather tons of data. IDOT has acquired a tool for asset management, looking at their pavement and bridges that crunches data and helps them develop their program, which brings us to our next step, performance-based programming. So to oversimplify, this is connecting what we're trying to achieve and the ideas we have to resources to achieve them. Next slide. So some examples of this, here's a slide or a screenshot of PACE's asset management plan where they've got scores for all of their different assets that they're trying to improve. A shot from our CMAP evaluation where we've scored everything to see how it's achieving our air quality goals. A big update that we're going that Ryan alluded to is our RSP, Regionally Significant Project or Regional Capital Project Evaluation. We're thinking about how to align our measures with the goals of the plan. So once we finish thinking through the definition of RSPs, we'll be moving on to align our measures with our goals and our targets there. And recently we had an STP project committee where we were bringing in new data sources from our transportation resilience project and looking at some of our other criteria. So constantly maintaining and updating our criteria as we go. Which brings us to monitoring and adjustment. We put all these ideas out there. Our long-range plan gets updated once every 4 years. Next slide. But there's a number of different points when we're monitoring and adjusting these targets. Right now we're in a window where we actually have a 2-year cycle for our air quality and congestion measures where we can update those targets. So we're bringing a report to our CMAP committee soon on that. You guys are well aware of the safety targets that we adjust annually. But monitoring adjustment goes on beyond just updating the targets. It's really thinking deep about each of these areas and goal areas. We know, as we talked about, safety, climate, congestion all have major activities going to sort of dig deep into the weeds on those that you're going to be hearing about. But as part of the RTP, we're looking across to find areas that we haven't gone as deep on. So the transit agencies and IDOT have gone deep on assets, but we haven't gone as deep recently. So there'll be either a policy scan or a policy brief as part of the RTP to help us think through those areas. And the financial plan helps guide us on all of this. So next slide. Finally, reporting and communication. So I alluded to this up front. We've got a new tool to communicate some of this information to you. Historically, we've had sort of a PDF that we update once every 4 years for our federal measures, and we've had a website that has our plan indicators that we do our best to keep up to date. But it's sort of in an old format that we struggle to keep up to date. We're moving to an Esri-based platform for our federal measures. And that's going to allow us to keep it much more up to date. And one nice thing, next slide. Our current information really just gives you the annual number and spits it out at you. The new dashboard will allow us to develop a map. You'll be able to zoom in, and we'll be able to sort of call out key pieces and link you to other information. Next slide. Here's one looking at safety. There's a pop-up that has some of the data. This dashboard will be on the same platform as our data hub. And so those data sets will be able to share both sort of a graphical version of it and link you to the raw data eventually. And here's a third one looking at travel reliability. One thing about our performance measures, we initially updated our federal measure or adopted our federal measures in 2018. With the 2022 update, we were really looking at a lot of COVID data and pandemic data. You can see with our congestion, those trends are starting to level out. So with the 2022 update, we really didn't change many of our measures. But we think we've sort of we're getting close to a new normal where now is a good time to really open up a lot of these measures that we haven't looked at in the past. Another benefit of this new platform, so you can see there's like a 2018, a 2022, and then there's going to be a difference between 2018 and 2022. We're going to be able to build things like story maps that help you digest the data, provide a little more analysis than just what the federal target status is, and tell a little bit of the story behind some of this data. So that should be coming out in the next month or so. We're working through getting a few of the data sets that haven't been updated in a few years a little more up to date before we send it out to you all. But that will be a great resource as we have all these other conversations to come back and have data to inform those. With that, are there any questions?
Any questions for Martin? Dr. Suraj. Dr. Suraj, do you mind using your microphone? Thank you.
Bad, sorry. How did you set the targets?
Yeah, so
Bigger to longer answer, then we can talk about.
that's a very relevant question. So each target was set a little bit differently. I mentioned the transit agencies and IDOT had developed these plans. So we took their targets into account when they were available. We looked to our financial plan and tried to have consistency between our goals of our plan and our financial resources. For example, we have a goal in our plan of doubling transit ridership. And so we had our mode share target that is federally required be consistent with doubling transit ridership. We're actually meeting that goal, but because work from home is part of our mode share goal, so we try to sort of take the overarching goals of the plan and translate the targets through them, but also working with our partners and having discussions like this. So.
Audrey.
Hi, it sounded like the ESRI platform is only for federal measures, and it says that in the title up there. The regional indicators, will there be an opportunity to reevaluate those indicators and even possibly add some or change them? When will that happen?
Absolutely. So they will build off of the plan goals. And so we'll be opening those up. Hopefully we're not going to throw them all out. We've had some of them for a long time and there's value in keeping them over time, but we're going to be sort of reconfiguring them to align with the plan update goals. And that might mean that some go away or we get new measures. One nice thing about the federal measures is that they have a very consistent data set, but some of our plan indicators are based on data that isn't reliably available. So occasionally we'll switch data sources or come up with a new indicator that has a better data set. So that'll be happening as part of the plan update process. We'll be looking at all of those indicators and open to new ones if you've got ideas.
I know that was just an example that you threw out, the transit, doubling transit and mode share, but could you explain a little more the work from home, how that's counted?
So the federal target is actually non-SOV commuting.
Okay.
And so both transit and work from home are considered non-SOV commuting. Carpooling too, but we are really not doing well on carpooling.
Any other questions? I have one, Martin. In terms of one of the slides previewed pavement condition on the interstates. Can you talk to me a little bit about the source data for that information? I know you said it's an Esri-based platform. What is in what level of detail do you plan on going into for this?
For the pavement condition, we get that data from IDOT. And I'm not sure, I think it's 1/10 of a mile that the pavement condition data is available in. And it
So the state has published data for their system.
for the NHS, yeah,
Okay, as part of the TAMP.
which is what the federal measure looks at, yeah.
Thank you. Really look forward to seeing this rolled out within a month or so, you say. Good luck as you wrap up those details, Martin. Okay, moving on to agenda item 6.03. Victoria Barrett is here from CMAP's Regional Policy and Implementation Division with a presentation on the recently released Speed Management Report. Good morning, Vicki.
Good morning. I'm going to try to lower this. I am lowering it. Excellent. Just took me like 10 times to learn how to do that. Good morning, everyone. My name is Victoria Barrett. I'm a senior transportation planner in the Regional Policy and Implementation Division of CMAP. I'm here to present a recently released report that we've published on speed management, addressing the regional traffic safety crisis. And I'm excited to share some of our findings today. So the speed management report was developed under our STAR program, which is our Safe Travel for All roadmap. It's a 5-year plan of work that is intended to address all aspects of safety that CMAP touches, including planning, data collection, policy development, and clearly this is part of our policy efforts to improve traffic safety. When we look at the way the report is organized, back one slide, please. And I'll talk a little bit about the safe system approach later, but we really kept the safe system approach in mind in the way we organized this paper. We first talk about the current traffic safety crisis that is happening in our nation and in our state and in our region. And then we spend some time talking about the role of speed in traffic safety. And then we have 3 chapters at the end of this paper that are divided into 3 different safe system approaches to addressing the issue of speeding. One is through safer roads or safer road design. One is through safer speeds and speed limits. And the last chapter is on how do we create safer road users when it comes to the issue of speeding. So as we've presented here before, and I'm sure many of you are aware, we are in the middle of a traffic safety crisis. We heard today some of the effects that the pandemic has had on travel, and safety is one of those as well. So when we look at traffic fatalities in the CMAP region, here the years are across the bottom. Here you'll notice that in about 2014, after decades of decline, traffic fatalities started to tick upwards. The green line here is the 5-year average of traffic fatalities, which is done to kind of soften the curve of year-to-year changes in traffic fatalities. And you can see that green line trending up. And you can also see the spike in traffic fatalities that happened in 2020 and 2021. While our numbers are declining from the peak, they are still above pre-pandemic levels. Another issue front of mind in the STAR program and in the issue of speeding is the fatalities that we are seeing among pedestrians and bicyclists. This is also in alignment with national numbers. Pedestrian safety crisis is real and has been an issue since about 2010 in our country. These are the regional numbers. Again, you can see that the risks really, really increased in 2021. That was the highest number for both pedestrian and bicyclist fatalities and traffic fatalities altogether. We also spent some time when we were looking at the safety crisis at understanding the equity implications that happen in traffic safety. These are the different racial groups in our region and their representation in our traffic fatalities. The green line represents Black residents in our region, and you can see that they are overrepresented in our traffic fatalities. There are many things at play here that we're still understanding, but we know from my daily travel survey information in our region that Black residents in our region often travel longer distances and for more hours per week to get to their appointments, their healthcare appointments, their jobs, their schools. So their exposure to traffic safety may be part of this story. It could also be a story about the quality of the infrastructure that exists in communities of color. And it could be a story about modes. So if you travel on certain modes, you are more exposed to traffic safety risks like bicycling and walking and accessing transit by those modes. So this is front of mind as we do our traffic safety work. And I included this information. This is traffic deaths as a public health risk. So this is a global comparison of the United States to other countries, some of which look very similar to our land use patterns and some that don't. But the point to make here is that it doesn't have to be this way. Americans have gotten very used to accepting traffic safety deaths. But when you compare our fatality rate per 100,000 inhabitants, the United States number is double that of Canada and Australia. So as I mentioned, we spent some time in the paper talking about speed's role in the traffic safety crisis. We know that speeding at the national level accounts for about 30% of all traffic fatalities. In our region, the number appears higher. Can we advance? Yes, excellent. Actually, could you go to the next slide? It's a better. Perfect. So according to the crash data that we receive from IDOT, that is, collected from all the police departments in the region, speed was a factor in 46% of all fatal crashes in northeastern Illinois between 2017 and 2021, which equates to about 1,200 deaths on our roads as a function of speed. One of the ways we wanted to try to understand the risks of speeding was understanding on what types of roads is speeding contributing to fatal and serious injuries. And that is a tricky thing to do. But one way in which we started to explore that was assigning the posted speed limit to the locations of fatal and serious injury crashes. And this was a somewhat surprising finding to us, which is that the highest rate of fatal and serious injury crashes was happening on roads with a posted speed limit of 30 miles per hour. As many of you know, 30 miles per hour is the statutory speed limit for urban districts, so it's a very common posted speed limit. But we were surprised to find out that this was the place where the most fatal, the worst of our crashes were happening on these types of roads, not the high-speed highways, but on these lower speed limit roads. And we know that 30 miles per hour has big implications when it comes to the safety of people external to vehicles. This is a graphic you might have seen before, but when a car is traveling 30 miles per hour, it has a 45% chance of killing a pedestrian that it strikes. And if you lower a speed limit or if you lower the speed of the car to 20 miles per hour, it only has a 5% chance of killing the pedestrian that it strikes. So 30 miles per hour is still a pretty high risk speed limit for people who are external to the vehicle. And these are some examples of roads in our region with a 30 mile per hour speed limit. And the point to make here is just that these are complex spaces. These are not, they're much different than highways where there's only one direction of travel and one activity happening, which is driving. But on these types of roads, you have pedestrians crossing, you have people on bicycles, you have cars parking. They're very complex environments that are trying to accomplish a lot of different services for people, which is likely contributing to this high rate of crashes. Some of the ways in which speed really is a threat is it decreases the field of vision of a driver. So the faster a driver is operating a vehicle, the less they are able to detect in their peripheral vision. This is just a brain function that happens to kind of reduce the intake of images. And so that means that the faster you're going, the less likely you are to detect a hazard alongside the road. That could be a car about to turn in from a driveway. It could be a ball bouncing into the street, but you are less likely to see something the faster you're driving. And another thing that speeding does is it increases the distance required for your car to stop. So once you do detect a hazard and decide that you're going to stop the vehicle to avoid the hazard, the faster you're going, the longer it takes you, A, to detect the hazard, which is the green bars, and then B, to actually bring the car to a stop, which is the blue bars. So I think we have here, an average, it takes about 100 feet in a city block to detect a hazard and bring a car to a stop, which is probably too late to really avoid a crash. I'm going to talk a little bit about kinetic energy. Kinetic energy is a really important component of the safe system approach to safety because kinetic energy is the force that delivers damage in a collision. And kinetic energy is a function of both the speed of the object traveling and the weight of the object traveling. Heavier vehicles deliver more kinetic energy in crashes. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this because it's an important issue when we talk about managing speed. So this is a chart based on EPA data that talks about the kinds of cars that comprise the American fleet of vehicles in 1975, 2000, and 2021. So in 1975, 81% of the vehicles in our fleet were sedans. Sedans are lower to the ground, and they are generally lower in weight. And then if you look at 2021, only 26% of our vehicle fleet is sedans. 56% of our fleet today is made up of SUVs, which barely existed in 1975, and 18% of our fleet today are trucks and minivans. SUVs, trucks, and minivans are all heavier and taller than sedans are. And if you continue to the next slide, I was told I was allowed to share this kind of wonky graph here today. Heavier vehicles traveling at lower speeds deliver comparable kinetic energy at impact as lighter vehicles traveling at higher speeds. So you can see on this chart, we actually kind of laid out the kinetic energy change. And you can see, let me make sure I get my terminology right. A Toyota Camry at 30 miles per hour has a similar kinetic energy to a Jeep Grand Cherokee at 25 miles per hour, which is the same as a Ford F-150 Lightning, which is the electric version of the F-150, has at 20 miles per hour. So the point here, and there's not a recommendation to reduce vehicle size in the paper, but there is a point to make that we need to slow vehicles down. So the speed limits that we set in 1975 function much differently than with today's vehicle fleet because these vehicles deliver more kinetic energy in crashes. Very new research came out this fall that shows that vehicles with different shapes of hoods have also major impacts in crash outcomes. So you can see vehicles with hoods more than 40 inches off the ground are 45% more likely to kill a pedestrian when striking, according to the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. So another aspect of our vehicle fleet that is posing a greater threat than it used to. And finally, the point to make here is that small reductions in speed can significantly reduce the global pedestrian fatality risk. So this is a little bit different than the graphic that showed one car striking one pedestrian. This is really about if we could have a global reduction in the average vehicle operating speed within a given area. If we could just come down 1 mile per hour from 30 miles per hour for the global operating speed, you could reduce the pedestrian fatality risk by 17%. So small differences in global speeding make big differences in safety. So I'll talk a little bit about our key findings, and then I'm happy to answer questions. Before I get into this, I mentioned earlier the safe system approach. This really helped us organize our thinking on the paper, and you'll see that we have, this paper will touch the issues of safe roads, safe speeds, and safe road users. So one overarching goal is to improve roadway design and capacity guidance to reduce speeding and exposure to safety risks. As many of you know, the ways in which we have designed our roads and set the speed limits on them have really put a priority on mobility over safety. So we have already started to implement this first recommendation with a research paper that we're doing through the Illinois Center for Transportation, which is study and pilot new approaches to roadway capacity and design guidance that reduce the demand for travel, because the more travel that occurs generally, the more fatalities and serious injuries you see. New approaches to design that encourage slower operating speeds through design and informational elements. This is often called self-explaining roadways or self-enforcing roadways that really are designed to constrain the speeds in low speed environments. And they and support compliance with a safe speed limit. We also want to look at the existing design guidance and standards to support and make sure that every aspect of them is supporting compliance with speed limits. Finally, there's opportunities to increase funding and scoring criteria for speed management projects. Many partners have expressed interests in reducing their citywide speed limits, but there is a cost associated with that in the form of buying signage, for example, and programs that could help partners afford new signage at reduced speed limits are an interesting way forward. And then we here at CMAP in our local technical assistance program are doing project level design guidance related to speed management. After we talk about safe roads, we can talk about encouraging safer speeds and speed limits. So as I mentioned, 30 miles per hour is a statutory speed limit in Illinois. Today, local municipalities in the state have the ability to reduce their citywide speed limit to 20 or 25 miles per hour. There are some pros and cons to that approach. Because, as I mentioned, there are costs associated for locals to reduce their speed limits, and those reduced speed limits do not apply to any of the state-owned roadways. So if a city reduces their speed limit to 25 miles per hour, the state roads in their community, which are sometimes the ones that see the highest volumes and the highest rate of crashes, would remain at 30 miles per hour. So there may be a better approach to addressing reduced speed limits in Illinois. And finally, we have a section of recommendations based on supporting safe road users. So when it comes to speeding, that is mostly about raising awareness among drivers of the risks of speeding. This can be done through improvements in drivers' education curricula or other programs that are intended to educate travelers. We also talk in this chapter about what enforcement techniques can really promote safety and equity outcomes. Many cities are seeing the results of automated speed enforcement, and we are clear to document those success stories and talk about how that could be done with an equity framework. We also talk about ways to improve the data associated with speeding so that our partners are better informed about the speeding issues in their communities. And I encourage you to check out the executive summary and the full report, which are posted on CMAP's website.
Thank you, Vicky. Any questions? Megan?
On one of the slides where you showed that the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit was the most fatalities, and I'm so sorry if this was in the report and I'm just not remembering it. Did you also know what the actual speed of the vehicle was when they, okay, that was my question, because I know we're working on the self-enforcing roadways and trying to slow people down.
Yeah.
But I would suspect that in those 30-mile-an-hour zones, people are probably going closer to 40.
5, right? Yeah,
And
absolutely.
then, okay.
Absolutely.
That was my question.
And that really was our signal. We were cognizant of that and realized that that's where the constraining the speed through design has to really come into play with the reduced speed limit. Yeah, very good point.
Jennifer? Yeah.
Thanks. First of all, thanks for the very clear presentation. Your graphs their graphs are wonky, but they're clear, so I appreciate it. And could we go to the one that you identified as wonky,
Yeah, with the kinetic energy.
So you alluded to the Ford Lightning being the electric version, and I guess, there are lots of good reasons to electrify, and I'm not suggesting not, but it does seem like what I've heard, and I'm not an expert, but electric vehicles are generally heavier, right? So even if the vehicle is smaller, it'll still be, the electric version of the Toyota Camry will be heavier than what's there, right? So just, that seems like that makes the speed component even more important if we anticipate vehicles are going to get heavier regardless of size, I guess,
Yes.
right?
Yes,
Is that fair?
absolutely. The electric vehicles, the batteries are still quite heavy. The F-150 is the top selling car in America, and the electric version of it is almost 2,000 pounds heavier than the non-electric version of it. So again, speed management is, if it's not critical today, it's going to be even more critical in the future.
Go ahead.
Yeah, like others, really appreciate this work. It seems clear from your work here that arterials are a big part of the problem, right, in both the city and the suburbs. I'm curious, like, what role you see CMAP playing and maybe this committee playing in dealing with design and planning those arterials moving forward. We have a rigorous process for regionally significant projects and highway corridors, but we don't have an analogous process on the arterial side. So often it's like a case by case municipal working with IDOT or the roadway manager to shape that moving forward, where it seems like what we really need is a regional strategy for redesigning these corridors in safe ways. Also, many of them have our highest transit ridership routes, so high ridership pace and bus and CTA routes that could benefit from additional bus priority, which also could help calm traffic and right size these roads. So I guess how can we as a region attack this at some sort of systemic level, whereas right now it's, one by one by one?
Yeah, I think speed management is the toughest on arterials. It has so many different types of uses, some that require driveways, some that require parking, some that require, throughput. That is part of what we're talking about with the regional transportation planning process. Like, what is corridor planning? What does really thoughtful corridor planning look like in terms of safety? I don't think we're there yet, but I love that idea.
And to respond to your question too, Kyle, I think I see CMAP's work and using this as an example as a way to start the conversation and shine a light on some of the issues that we as a region should be focusing on. So it's an 80-something page read, but it's a fast read. I recommend everybody take a look at it. There are some very practical ways that and actionable steps that we can take. Some we need to take time to deliberate. I know there's recommendations in there about, ordinance or motor vehicle code changes. Also, you highlight in there about working with IDOT on updating the BDE and local roads manual. I thought that was particularly interesting because more often than not, I mean, CDOT is very lucky. They have that memorandum of understanding with the state to allow for very innovative and countermeasures for pedestrian safety and access to transit. They have a little bit more leeway. But you do recognize in the memo or in the document the challenges that implement agencies have, which may be, for example, asking for design variances. So what is the standard, doesn't exactly align as well with the network challenges and safety challenges we have today. So, as an outcome of this plan, I really look forward to working with CMAP and perhaps starting a dialogue. My thought is we can't change the manual for the state, but what about maybe for Northeastern Illinois because we do have, I think you started 40 to 45% of the fatalities that the state has is within this region. So very well done. I thought it was very actionable and easy to understand. Any more questions or comments for Vicki? Okay, thank you so much. This is a dense and good agenda today. So we're going to move on to another topic I think we all enjoy, which is a climate plan update. So Kate Avasik and Noah Harris from CMAP's Regional Policy and Implementation Division are here to update us on the Climate Action Plan and to talk about strategies. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning. Thank you for having us. Noah and I are excited to be here today to give you an update on the Climate Action Plan, share some initial research that we have related to transportation emissions, and then hear your thoughts. We really want to leave time to hear your thoughts on the different opportunities and challenges for decarbonizing the transportation sector. You can move on to the next slide here. So just as a reminder, maybe for some of you, this project is supported in part by US EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grants Program, or CPRG. CMAP is leading the development of the CAP in partnership with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus and our sister agency, NERPC in Northwest Indiana. And the goal of the plan, the goals of the plan, there's two main goals. And that is to create a path for this mega region to achieve a 50% reduction in GHGs by 2030 and net zero by 2050. And we have a tight timeline for completing this plan. We don't typically work off of these tight timelines. We need to have it complete by July of next year. So we are just under the 1-year mark and running fast. Just a little note on CPRG and the program in general. It provided planning funds to states and metropolitan statistical areas to across the country, and this included the Chicago MSA, which includes 14 counties that are shown here on this map across the states of Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. Nearly all MSAs and states, including the 3 states that I just mentioned here, are participating in the CPRG program. So that means that they are developing their own climate action plans at the state level. Since our last presentation to this committee in March, we did increase the planning area boundary. This was based on a recommendation from NERPC to include LaPorte County, which is the third county within their, one of 3, I should say, counties within their jurisdiction, and it was excluded from the MSA boundary. So we really wanted to be responsive, understanding the needs of full coverage and the importance of implementing this plan and not just allowing it to sit on the shelf upon completion next year, to include that and expand our boundary. And so we've made some adjustments related to our greenhouse gas inventory to account for the increase in our boundary here, and are moving forward with this new approach. So to meet the net zero greenhouse gas emissions goal, we're really going to have to explore all strategies across all sectors. And these are just some of the strategies that we'll be digging into with this plan. And I have to stress, we're really excited by this. With investments in renewable energy and EVs and new technologies, we know that we can create new jobs and spur economic development in communities that have been disinvested and left behind in our region. And we also know that we will need those tried and true strategies like transit and compact development, as well as innovation to advance those strategies in ways that we really haven't seen before. So as we build on the work of others and really chart our own path forward for this plan, we wanted to develop a set of guiding principles to help us all confirm the values that we aim to include in the planning process and help to guide us to through some difficult decision-making that we have and may encounter in the future. We just sent off these draft guiding principles to our steering committee for comment, so they're still a work in progress, but we have 3 of them identified here. And the first one is commit to zero, embrace transformative actions or strategies that accelerate the region's progress toward net zero emissions targets and avoid the worst impacts of climate change. Second is center equity. Seek to reduce existing disparities for underserved and marginalized communities, design strategies that maximize co-benefits and advance an inclusive energy transition. And then last but not least, plan for action. Prioritize actions that move the region toward both short and long-term goals. Collaborate with stakeholders to ensure plan recommendations are relevant, realistic, and actionable. So in order for the plan to be comprehensive, we know that we need to cover many topic areas and many topic areas that go beyond our typical purview here at CMAP. And we know that we're going to need to work with many partners across the entire planning area to get that done. So we've set up an engagement strategy that includes different activities, and really the intent here is to harness the expertise of implementers and subject matter experts, as well as community leaders to craft effective and equitable reduction strategies and build momentum for implementation over the next year. So we're doing this through a steering committee, as well as working groups, and really leaning on the existing committees like this one here that we have within this mega region. The 4 working groups that we're convening, equity, buildings, industry, and transportation, they have representatives on the steering committee to really strengthen the ties between the work that's happening in those working groups and the work that's happening within the steering committee. We're also planning to hold workshops or focus groups as needed to really bring in more perspectives and expertise around certain topic areas and carry out different engagement activities as well. This is more of the public-facing engagement to really learn from communities that have been overburdened by pollution and stand to benefit the most. We held our first steering committee in June, and then just last month we convened our first round of sector working group meetings. And so several of you or your agencies have participated in these activities, and we just appreciate that your dedication to this project and the insights that you've brought so far. So that's just a brief overview of the project. I want to turn it over to Noah, who's going to give us a high-level overview, sorry, if we could go to the next slide, of the transportation emissions sector. Thank you.
Hello, you can go to the next slide. So I'm going to start today by summarizing our greenhouse gas emissions data, and then I'll transition into a deeper dive into the transportation sector emissions. Based on US EPA guidance, CMAP was required to develop a greenhouse gas emissions inventory for the entire climate action planning area. The figure here summarizes that inventory, showing the 3 core sectors that drive emissions in the area. Buildings emit the most emissions of all sectors in the inventory at nearly 40%. And then there's the industrial sector emitting 34% of emissions. And finally, we have the transportation sector as the 3rd largest source of greenhouse gas emissions at 23.7%. You might also notice here that the GHG inventory data is from 2020, and we often steer clear of data from 2020 given the various impacts of the pandemic. However, this inventory is built using modeled and reported data from various timescales and geographies, which reduces the impacts of shorter-term fluctuations that occurred during the height of the pandemic. So as such, we feel confident about using 2020, and especially since it's the most recently available data that we have. So the previous slide showed the broad sectors that contribute to overall emissions in the planning area, and now we're going to zoom in on the transportation sector specifically. The transportation sector can be split into 5 subsectors, and going through each of them here on the left. First, the on-road subsector represents emissions from cars, trucks, buses, and other vehicles on our roadways. The off-road subsector represents emissions from vehicles that do not travel on roadways, and this also includes motorized equipment. Examples include forklifts, lawnmowers, and tractors. The aviation subsector represents emissions from aircrafts during landing, takeoff, and on-site at aviation facilities in the planning area. Locomotive includes emissions from freight railroad operations, commuter lines, and passenger trains. And finally, the marine subsector includes emissions from commercial marine vessel diesel engines, either underway or at the ports in the area. On the right, you can see a graph showing the share that each subsector contributes to the total transportation emissions in the planning area. Just over 80% of transportation emissions come from on-road vehicles, such as cars and trucks. Off-road vehicles and equipment make up 12% of the sector, followed by aviation at 5%. And finally, emissions from locomotives and commercial marine vessels are quite marginal related to the other subsectors. A key takeaway here is that on-road emissions at the end of the day are really what's driving overall transportation sector emissions. And because on-road emissions make up the vast majority of transportation sector emissions, we want to focus in on that subsector. This chart here shows on-road emissions by vehicle type. Passenger trucks and passenger cars combined make up about 70% of on-road emissions. And next we have freight trucks and light commercial trucks, which together contribute about 28% of on-road emissions. Buses contribute only 1.6% to on-road emissions, and then the remaining 1% here come from motorcycles, motorhomes, and refuse trucks. One of the main takeaways here is that passenger-related travel is really driving on-road transportation emissions, and freight trucks are a notable contributor as well. Understanding and recognizing the way that transportation emissions impact communities is critical to the development of an equity-centered climate action plan, as well as an analysis of co-pollutants and co-benefits, which are requirements of the plan. We all know that the transportation system contributes to poor air quality, and that exposure to air pollutants such as particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, and volatile organic compounds cause a range of negative health outcomes. We also know that harmful air pollution and its impacts are most severe in historically disinvested, marginalized, and underserved communities. Communities with significant freight activity are particularly exposed to poor air quality because of high levels of pollution from medium and heavy-duty trucks. Similarly, communities along highways and near warehouses, ports, airports, intermodal facilities, and rail yards where there is significant freight activity are disproportionately exposed to transportation pollutants. Because of redlining, racial covenants, land use, and other discriminatory policies, communities of color and people with low incomes tend to bear the brunt of transportation-related air pollution. The transportation system contributes to other kinds of community burdens, such as those related to mobility and lack of access to destinations, safety, and others. And while we're focusing on air pollution today, we will continue to explore and discuss the range of burdens in further detail in the future. Our early research is helping us to understand what's driving emissions in each sector. Developing an understanding of emissions drivers can help us identify key challenges and effective emissions reduction strategies in response to those drivers. And we have 5 of those identified here. First, on baseline regional conditions such as population trends, amount of economic and freight activity, land use and development patterns, and location of employment all drive the demand for transportation and therefore have an impact on transportation emissions. Next, technology. We also see technological shifts and advancements in the sector that are likely to impact future transportation emissions. For example, vehicle electrification and the increased adoption of alternative fuel vehicles are likely to reduce transportation emissions, but the rate of adoption by consumers and fleet vehicle replacement cycles, as well as the pace of the transition to clean energy, will ultimately determine the rate of decarbonization here. The cost of travel influences demand for transportation and therefore impacts the level of transportation emissions. The cost of travel is primarily associated with the cost of fuel, but this category encompasses all of the out-of-pocket costs associated with travel, such as tolls, transit fares, e-bike incentives, the cost to own and maintain a personal vehicle, or the cost and convenience, especially in terms of lost or gained time to use a particular mode of travel. Next, national and international goods movement. Zooming out here, the Chicago region is a historic freight hub for North America, and there are projections showing that freight activity may increase significantly in the coming decades, and this includes projections related to the growth of e-commerce. And finally, changing climate conditions. So on top of all of these other drivers, more frequent and extreme weather events, such as severe heat and precipitation, put increased stress on the existing transportation system and other public infrastructure, which could change travel preferences and deteriorate the condition of transportation facilities, leading ultimately to changes in travel demand and congestion that could increase emissions. So with all that, I'll pass it back to Kate to cover strategies.
Thanks. Yeah, so we're going to end here talking about what is needed, right, to be able to really slash GHG emissions. And so I want to revisit our national goals. I quickly passed over these goals when I was introducing the project, and so I want to give a little bit more context here. So with the U.S. as party of the Paris Agreement, our national goals are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50%, this is relative to 2005 levels, by 2030, and reach net zero emissions by 2050. And just to explain a little bit more about what net zero means. A net zero emissions reduction goal really means cutting greenhouse gas emissions released by human activities as close to zero as possible, with any remaining GHGs balanced out by removal. And while the CPRG program doesn't require a specific reduction target, they do want our work to be in line with these national goals, and they strongly encourage us as well to set sector-based emission reduction targets, especially for the highest priority sectors, which, as Noah just explained, includes transportation, includes industry and buildings as well. So this all means that through this climate action plan, we will be exploring updated emission reduction targets, including this overall target, as well as potentially sector targets as well, to really align with these current national goals. It's clear that decarbonizing the transportation sector will not be easy and that we really need a system-wide approach. This graphic was created by US DOT to really show how at a high level, there's really three main approaches to cut transportation-related GHGs. First, we have making transportation more convenient. These strategies show how we can systematically reduce the distance traveled by prioritizing transportation access and proximity to employment, community services, and other destinations through things like active transportation, community design, and land use planning. Oops, sorry, that's just on my side. Second, what we need here is we need to make the transportation sector more efficient. These strategies look at the energy intensity of a given trip and how we might shift to more energy efficient modes of transportation by improving the movement of goods and the reliability and efficiency of our transit and other transportation systems. And then last but not least, Noah touched on this already, we need clean energy. These strategies look at the carbon intensity of a given trip and options to transition to zero emission vehicles and fuels across all transportation modes and subsectors. And I said earlier that we really need all strategies on the table in order for us to meet these really lofty decarbonization goals. And many of these are also mutually beneficial. As I'm sure you all know, we can't reach our goals by electrifying vehicles without cleaning the ultimate energy source that we're relying on. So last but not least, laying out all the strategies is fine and well. DOT has done it, Department of Energy has done it, but what must we do and what must we do here in this region to really move the needle? We know that we're going to need infrastructure, investments, and financing, improvements in system management and operations and pricing mechanisms, as well as all of the other implementation measures that we have listed here. And, some of these strategies are really going to require multiple actions or multiple of these levers to really help advance them. And through this process, we really need to make sure that we're hearing from our stakeholders, including you all of you in the room, to really understand what is most appropriate and what's going to be most effective to implement. So that's all the content that we've prepared for you today. I do have 2 discussion questions that are really related. And I can also take any questions now if we want to pause. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kate and Noah. Any questions or anyone looking to respond to the discussion question we have on the screen here? Jack.
Awesome, thank you. So just want to talk a little bit about, you've mentioned EVs a number of times. Last week, we at Illinois EPA, as many of you may know, received $430 million federal award to tackle some of these exact questions. Roughly a quarter of that is transportation, freight emissions, working with fleets to talk with them about what their hurdles are to electrifying. We're not here necessarily to say that you need to electrify, but rather how could we help you if that's something you're interested in, especially for shorter trips, right? We understand that maybe the Class 8 long haul isn't quite there yet. And that's things that the market is working on. But yeah, other than that, I mean, this is all great stuff. I appreciate the work you guys are doing. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Jennifer.
So when we develop talking points as an agency for what we're doing, our transition of our bus fleet to electric is always in there. It is an important component. It is a long-term strategy, right? It'll take a while. Our rail is already electric, obviously, if you didn't already know that. But I feel like it's always really hard to sort of elevate the benefit of just the transit itself. For whatever reason, that seems to fall off the sort of public conversation in the media, right? There's a lot of focus on electrifying the buses, but if those buses are empty, right, and we can't get people onto them more, it doesn't do a lot. So I just, we obviously as a transit agency are doing what we can to improve our ridership. We'll need support in various ways, right? Like we need to still be able to operate good frequencies, and if the buses are stuck in traffic all the time, nobody's gonna move from their car into the bus. So we just need support from all of our partners. Thanks.
Great point. Thank you.
Sure. And I'll jump in as well. I appreciate the data, how nice and clear it was, and I'll be following up to get the slides so that we can share them internally. We are doing everything we can at Metra as well to make our fleet as zero emission as we possibly can, given the environment that we're working in with all of the freights. We're going to test out zero emission train sets, looking at a whole host of things. We've been working with you folks on the CAP program as well. When I look at the data and I see 80% is on road under transportation, I see locomotives, which is kind of a portion of us as 1.9%. Even if we electrified our entire fleet, we are doing just a small percentage. And then I look at my transit partners, PACE and CTA, and I see bus is 1.6%. Again, we are doing just a very, very small part, when the big issue I see on road passenger vehicles being 70%. If we can get those folks onto our systems, we have done a huge gain for the region. And you mentioned it. How do we make mode choice and mode shift a bigger conversation that it will help the environment, help these targets? it seems to get lost most of the time. The conversation around the transit system is you need to be greener. But I don't think us being greener is really going to get us to the 2030 target of 50%, much less the net zero for 2050.
Yeah, that's a really great point. You're absolutely correct. Thank you for that.
Good point, Lynette. And I also wonder, out of that 70% of cars are capable of doing a mode shift to transit, you know, especially with, like, within our region, just so that we could understand, like, if it would be, what would be high yield in terms of effort. But yeah, excellent observation. Kyle.
Yeah, kind of building off that, Tara, I think, you know, we know that transit is not and cannot be an option for every trip in the region. So how can we focus on parts of the region where there are quality transit options, and then also deal with demand and needs of travel for cars, right? And I know it's when we think about growing transit ridership, we talk most about how do we make transit more competitive, how do we speed up transit. Big part of the equation is the cost and convenience of driving, right? And the extent to which driving is being subsidized and supported and made easier, even within corridors where transit is a viable option, right? So when we talk about things like parking pricing and road diets and these strategies, I think often, you know, people get nervous because we're suggesting that they need to be deployed everywhere. But the best place to focus the conversation is where there's greatest potential for transit on key corridors. And some of those corridors are being planned right now, right? So centering the climate impact of getting more people to ride transit where it is available is obviously key here.
Thank you. You know, on the next slide, we, wanted to hear what you're working on, but we also understand that there are major implementation challenges. So to the extent that we have a little bit of time and you all want to share, what challenges have you faced? What are the roadblocks? And what really needs to happen that's outside of your control?
That's a doozy.
Yeah,
Who wants
it's
to
a
go
long
first?
list. I don't know where to
Conversation
start.
starter.
I mean, it's kind of what I talked about a little bit for our plan for the CPRG award. I don't want to keep going back to that. I'm sorry, but it's working with, that 70%, right? So we have part of that award. We're hoping to do some kind of fleet concierge service where we would have someone who the fleets could work with directly if they are interested in electrification, sorry. So that's one, right? I don't know. There are others.
This is Amy CMAP. It's kind of, I think what Kate is drawing upon here is you all have different initiatives that are going on. As you think about implementing those projects and ideas, you're likely to rub up against something, right? And so I know in some places, maybe the electrical grid network is just not going to support the upgrade of a bus garage that you need, right? To be updated to support an electric bus fleet. So those are some of the things that give us a unique insight to what are the other sectors and what are the other spaces that we need to start sort of influencing to make sure that your investment and your efforts actually matter at the end of the day.
Dr. Suraj?
I think I saw a slide that said, what are you working on?
Mhm.
Okay.
Right.
I was going to save this for other business, but I might as well sprinkle it here. We currently launched a survey to gauge the attitudes and perceptions of employers as it pertains to work from home. It ties into Lynette's point and Angela's point about transit. As we are seeing more and more traffic on the roads compared to even 2019 to now, one of the biggest hits that has been observed is for the transit industry. And so if we can spread the word about this survey, get us some data about what employers are thinking and doing or planning to do regarding work from home, it might feed into some of the things that you guys are working on. So self-serving promo, but at the same time might have a benefit at the end of the day.
Thank you, Dr. Suraj. Audrey, you had a question or comment?
Yeah, just a comment. As we talk about the urgency of mode shift, we all know that I think land use is a big piece of this, and a lot of us in this room don't have control over that. But MPC is actually starting a project looking at transit supportive development in the suburbs, and we know RTA is finishing its guidebook this year, is working on a guidebook. And we are conducting interviews right now, exploring kind of the barriers to that. We know it's really complicated, but I think we all, again, just want to underscore what Amy was saying. Let's identify the barriers, and are they public education barriers? Are they state policy barriers? And how can we just identify them and try to overcome them? A lot of it's parking management, right sizing parking. And so just, we need to really just be open about it and delve into it and start to tackle it, because this is very urgent.
Thank you, Audrey.
We're CTA is part of the transportation working group. I think this is a big question, and we can, the challenge is one. We can delve into that more, but I guess to sort of synthesize like a number of challenges, right? Like I feel like we sort of continually bump up a thing where just because one improvement or one shift or one change doesn't garner a huge mode shift, that it's then not worth doing. But then if you have that on, you work on projects disparately, right? Like we can't upgrade the entire transit system overnight, right? So like that is, we can't double the frequency. We can't have 200 miles of bus lane overnight, right? So if the argument is sort of, or the different structures and policies and models are all sort of built to show that it won't make a big difference, right? Then it's sort of like death by 1,000 cuts. You get told no in every facet, and then you are never able to build it up.
Yeah, just one quick comment on that. I do think that I absolutely understand that point. And I think when we get, what we're going to get out of this plan is a clear picture that absolutely everything is going to be necessary and everything will find a home. And so some of we're starting to grapple with what level of detail can we accomplish, within this plan, but certainly, even something that's outlined as an action has many different steps and different scales, and we need to collectively consider it all together and how that all scales up to actually make an impact. So thank you for that comment.
Mike from Lake County.
So we just wrapped up a single occupancy vehicle reduction study, and one of the things that, as we were putting that together, just building off what you said is, just looking at pre-COVID in Lake County, a 3% reduction in SOV trips is 10,000 vehicles off of the system at rush hour in Lake County. So it doesn't have to be a big dramatic change to have a pretty large impact. But when we were looking at it, when you're looking at mode shift or looking at it a different way, behavior change, there's carrots and sticks, and we tend to focus on carrots and incentives because sticks are very unpopular. And, we all work for elected officials basically in this room, so, but those are things that if we're going to hit these goals, at least need to be discussed.
Great point.
Just tying something together, I think said by Lynette and Jen and Audrey is, I like what you said, Jen, about the getting individuals onto the transit system. And certainly like economic development is a huge part of it for the city of Chicago. For example, you may have heard the announcement about the Quantum Park at the United Steel site. That was a place where there were, historically 20,000 jobs, which provide that locational efficiency. When you look at the 80% of that regional emission coming from on-road, and then I think another 80%, like 60% total, And then the equation you put, right, it's like VMT per trip times pollution per VMT times pollution per energy times energy. You get all those variables. Just having economic development and neighborhood-focused economic development is a massive driver of creating that attractiveness of like there's jobs, destinations, all the, amenities of a successful life in our neighborhoods. And so I think, we're very lucky in the city of Chicago. We have amazing CTA service, grid bus service, all the metro lines run through the city, and a lot of opportunity that in many ways the whole city is transit oriented already. But getting the economic development to really catalyze that potential that's there, I think is a huge lever. That when I would say implementation challenge, it's a challenge in so much as we rely on our private sector development partners to do development. So even something like the Mayor Johnson's Cut the Tape initiative to try to speed up the pace of economic development, I think is part of the climate strategy because we do rely on those investments being made through private capital to get, housing, industry, job creation, coming to all the communities in the region.
Thank you. That's a really great point.
Okay, thank you, Kate and Noah, for your presentation. We're going to move on to legislative updates. So John Carpenter from CMAP's Intergovernmental Affairs Group is here with the legislative update. I'm very excited. 6-page memo, John. Love it. Tell us what's happening in Springfield.
Nothing right now. The legislature adjourned back in the beginning of June, end of May, but the hearings continue on transit particularly. The Senate Transportation Committee has kicked off a series of hearings around the region and the state to hear input on opportunities to improve transit service. The first 2 hearings have taken place and focus on how transit supports the economy, and the second one on how transit must be accessible and equitable. We continue to follow these hearings and will provide input as necessary. Other legislative action that took place at the end of last session or didn't take place, neither of the RPA appropriation bills, which would have appropriated $5 million to CMAP to fulfill the regional planning obligations by the Regional Planning Act, were incorporated in the 25 budget. We continue working with members of the General Assembly and the Governor's Office to advance that proposal and get it included in next year's budget. Sent the RPA modernization bill, the Regional Planning Act modernization bill, a bill that would make changes to CMAP's enabling statute to support timely decision-making by the CMAP board while maintaining regional consensus for key agency activities, passed both chambers and was sent to the governor. We expect it's on the governor's desk now. We expect him to sign it because the proposal received unanimous support in both chambers of the General Assembly. We continue to track legislation before the General Assembly that impacts the region and is relevant to CMAP's work. CMAP's IGA staff has included a list of that legislation that we're tracking in the legislative update that may be of interest to the Transportation Committee. You should have copies of those bills. And with that, I'll take any questions you may have.
Audrey.
I just wanted to point out one thing about the subject matter hearings, that the one that's the 8th, it was changed to the 9th.
That's
So it's in Naperville at the Naperville City Hall.
Thank you. So then we can all go to the Lakeshore Drive public meeting and the next day go
near
over to
transit.
Naperville.
It's near transit.
I have one question for you, John. On page 4 of your memo, it looks like there already is a bill to amend the Illinois Vehicle Code to reduce the default speed limit to 20 rather than 30, which is complementary to the recommendations that were in the report that Victoria Barrett gave an overview. Do you have any information about that for us?
Well, that bill was introduced early in the session by Representative Buckner. It didn't move. It was what we call a conversation starter. I think it's something that will be up for conversation and discussion in the upcoming session, probably next session. I don't think much will take place during the veto session, but it'll probably be reintroduced in January. And depending on what the sponsor wants to do, we'll see what kind of conversations and discussion take place. But it's out there. It'll probably resurface again in January.
Yeah, interesting that there's already legislative action in this area,
He's got a package of bills dealing with these issues, transportation, transit, housing, that I think he wants to get conversations underway on all those subjects.
Thank you. Anyone have questions for John? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. So moving on to other business, is there any other business that committee members would like to bring forward at this time? Dr. Suarez, how about an update on that survey? What can I Google to find out and fill out your survey?
Google the Urban Transportation Center, Google the Urban Transportation Center's LinkedIn, Facebook pages, my LinkedIn page. Any of these will have a blurb about the survey. CMAP's latest communication brief has a link to the survey.
Oh, it does.
It's on
Okay.
CMAP's website. We just need employers to go in and take the survey. If there are employers who are interested in talking to us, we've been conducting a few interviews with employers at different levels. We are targeting C-suite, HR, and managerial levels within organizations, trying to get triangulation, if you will, because this is not an easy aspect to comprehend. And so any and all help will be greatly appreciated, because I think it's ultimately going to get us a peek into what drives traffic, pun totally intended.
Thank you. Yeah, I think one of the things that became evident to all of us here today is there's just such a constellation of things that are at play and that drive the outcomes that we're looking for, which is a safer, more resilient transportation network, right? And the work that you're doing at the Urban Transportation Center helps us achieve that end. It's just another piece of data we can have. So thank you.
And there's been a lot of work on employee preferences about work from home. There's very little on the employer side of things. And now that we are somewhat in a stable state, coming out of whatever we endured 3 years ago, 4 years ago, it's stabilizing. And then now is a good time, we think, to poll the employers to find out, because there's some really very nuanced issues at play here. And then just like Audrey mentioned, land use, there are some impacts on land, space. Everything is going to be affected if this continues. And then we just need to hit a few points of those and see how it comes back to affect transportation.
Thank you. Does anyone from the audience wish to address the committee today? We're at the public comment section of the agenda. Terry, do you have anyone? Okay. Kama, do we have anyone online? Doug?
Yes, Todd Schmidt.
Okay, Todd Schmidt. Hello. Todd, I see you on mute. Please go ahead. No comment.
Oh, must be an accidental hand raise.
Okay, thank you. Do we have anyone else for public comment?
Yes, it's Garland Armstrong, formerly of Des Plaines, now living in Des Moines, Iowa. How you doing, everybody?
Fine, Garland. Good to hear from you.
Well, thanks. Me and my wife was listening in, and we want to give kudos to Audrey when she was on Chicago Tonight about the speed limit, because I think my suggestion is there are some people who cannot speak clear English are driving recklessly, and I think they need to translate it in other languages on how to stop their patterns of driving recklessly, because that's where the situation is, especially those in the age group and who cannot speak clear English. So I think y'all need to work on that to make sure to tell them in the age group, even for those who cannot speak clear English, how to tell them what's the reality, and they need to stop going out of control, recklessly driving, because another incident would be happening. Only time will tell, so that they can make sure what they've done is wrong and not try to run away from it. So I think you need a lot of those translations, how people can understand the reality of not driving recklessly, and to make sure that they really understand it, because they really don't understand the picture of it. So it's like a pattern. So we need to do something about that down the road, because God forbid another person gets hit, and then there are those who cannot speak clear English on what they've done. We need a lot of education on that one, because that's where we need to start educating and start training them what is what. So that's my suggestion. If anybody has any ideas or comments on that, and also too, making sure that you go to zero emissions. I hope CTA Metro Pace is working on to make sure if the unthinkable happens, especially the fire in any areas, like underneath where the battery is feel like it's going to start a fire, and the same thing too with those commuters and passengers on there, and they really don't know what's the strategy plan on how to escape if it happens coming to any station. Will they be able to be ready to be educated, trained, and how to get extreme help if it occurs? So how they done it so well in the Chicagoland area, making sure that people will say, this is definitely what we need and need to understand it. So I'll be glad to answer any questions or comments from any of the committees over there if they have any suggestions or ideas.
Thank you, Garland. I don't see anyone raising their hand. Thank you for your comments.
Okay.
Moving on, the next meeting of this committee is scheduled for September 13th, 2024. Please mark your calendars. And seeing that no other business is before the committee, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Moved by Amy, seconded by Jack. All those in favor? Opposed? This meeting is adjourned.